Welcome to episode number 325, where I'm speaking with Jeannine Rashidi about her book, Abundance Beyond Trauma. Jeannine shares her own personal journey, which led her to the work that she's doing today. And she also shares her EDHIR process she developed for mental, emotional, and physical digestion of trauma and adverse life experiences. So please stay tuned. Hi there, I'm your host Colette, and on this podcast I will be sharing the teachings of Ayurveda, yoga, and holistic health practices. Now, if you're new to Ayurveda, I recommend checking out the first couple of episodes where I do an introduction to Ayurveda and the mind-body types. Thanks for listening, and now here's a new episode. This is the final call for the upcoming group Digestive Reset Cleanse starting February 2nd. The first week of this cleanse is preparation. So you have up until Wednesday, February 7th, to do your 90-minute online consultation with me so that I can tailor the recipes, the yoga, the mindfulness, the self-care to you and your lifestyle before we start into cleanse week on Friday, February 9th. So still time, but best to register and book your consultation soon so you can avoid any disappointment. And even though this is an at-home cleanse, you go through it in a supportive group environment with a private community forum where we can share and hold each other accountable. So if you're interested, check out the link in the show notes or visit my website, elementshealingandwellbeing.com. And for this group event, go to the events page. I hope you can join us. Welcome back to the Elements of Ayurveda podcast. Today, I'm very happy to welcome Jeannine Rashidi, who is the founder of Goodbye Tension and Doctor of Ayurveda in Training. Jeannine has guided clients towards physical, mental, emotional, and digestive relief for the last 20 years. Her best-selling book, Abundance Beyond Trauma, showcases the EDHIR process she developed for mental, emotional, and physical digestion of traumatic and adverse life experiences. Jeannine's mission is to revolutionize how we relate harmoniously between the heart and mind after the disconnect from trauma. Jeannine, welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Colette. It's an honor to be here.
Well, I got a copy of your book, and thank you very much for forwarding that to me. And I was just enthralled by your story, and you share a lot about your own personal journey in your book, Abundance Beyond Trauma. Can you share how your life experiences led you to write this book and to do the work that you do today?
Sure. So I remember having a conversation with one of my uncles, and this was probably maybe 17, 18 years ago. And he said, you really should write a book. And I did not believe that I had the capacity or the know-how to do so at the time. But that seed that he planted definitely continued to churn. When COVID hit, that's when I realized, one, I was writing the book for many reasons. I was writing the book for myself, mainly to remind myself of what I had been through and how far I had come. At the time that I wrote my book, I was in a dysfunctional relationship that I had been in for almost a decade, and I had lost myself almost completely because of the dynamic of that relationship. And so in that way, COVID was actually a blessing for me because it created the time and space. Because at the time I couldn't physically go in and see clients. And I thought to myself, well, let me start writing and let's see, how that goes. It's a beautiful byproduct that it helps others. I really wanted people to have tools because as I've been going through my journey, what I realized is when I first, started therapy is many of the psychologists that I was working with were overwhelmed by my story. And what I wrote in the book, I kept it as above the line as possible so that people wouldn't get triggered by reading it or traumatized by reading it. So I just brought in key points to help people understand, here's what happened and here's what happens to the way we think and feel as a result of something like that, and how that can be carried into our relationships. So for me, it was really important to have tools that I could offer people, because I remembered what it was like to not have any. And so as I, continued to write, I not only felt my own personal power come back through the writing, as I was sharing with people what I was doing and asking, friends to proofread and, give their opinion, everyone was so encouraging. And they said, Jeannine, you've got to get this out there. It's going to help many people. And I think it published in 2021. And still to this day, I will wake up and receive emails or messages on social media from readers talking about how much it has helped them, how the explanation of trauma, the I'm Triggered Pocket Guide, the EDHIR process were easy steps to follow. And so that, that's really a good feeling. That feels like a good dharmic purpose, and, for me. So to answer your question, how did I get into the work that I'm doing? Well, when I left with my daughters, my first husband was very abusive. I wrote about him in the book. And I, found myself as a single parent, and I was working in corporate America when I left. And the thing I did not like about corporate America was it had no heart, but also, I wanted to be able to be the mom I wanted to be by taking my kids to school, taking them to all the different practices, and a regular 9-to-5 wasn't going to do that. So I had I had run away from home when I was 15, and that's also when I ended up getting pregnant twice. And so by the time I was 20, I had 2 children. And through that process, even though I was a straight A student, I had run away from home, hoping to find a better life, as best a 15-year-old girl could do, having experienced trauma. So I did not finish high school. I got a GED. And so I thought, well, I probably need to find a trade. And I liked working with my hands, and some advertisements, came on the TV, and one was mechanic. And I do actually love, tinkering around with cars, but also massage therapy. And I thought, well, my hands will probably feel better and look better and be softer if I go into massage therapy. So that's the route I chose. It was very logical. I knew I could create my own practice because I was in marketing before, but I had never had a massage. So it was through the massage training that I started noticing the impressions that were showing up in my own body, as well as emotions that were starting to come up to the surface so that I could process. Now, I already knew that I had trauma, but there was not a connection to the body. So I began my practice 8 or 9 months after my training. And the first thing I noticed were the clientele that were coming in, they naturally started just talking about their trauma or their negative life experiences. And so I questioned, who am I to help these people? Because I'm freshly coming out of a very traumatic situation and trying to heal myself and survive with 2 kids. But people seemed to feel safe. And so I just started asking questions as, I was, working with people. And I realized I need more, training on how do you assist somebody to process mentally and emotionally while they're receiving some sort of body work. And so, I explored different modalities, trained with some of them, got certified in others. And at some point, just a few years after my massage training, I realized that the type of business for massage, as far as chronic conditions, I didn't like it because it felt like the client would have to come in forever. There was no getting to the core of the problem. And that bothered me because I felt like I would be continually profiting from pain.
Yeah.
And I wanted to see people get better. not stay with me. So I needed a different the mindset for my practice is always a revolving door clientele. If you've stayed with me for a really long time and there's no progress, then I'm not the right practitioner for you. Because ideally, one, will go through the healing journey. Maybe they will need support here and there, but then they will go out and they will, tell their friends. And there's certainly not a shortage of people who are in pain, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, psychological. And so I continued my journey of different certifications. I decided to move into more integrative body work where there's no oils or creams. Clients don't have to take off their clothes, which for a trauma survivor is very comforting. And the whole basis of any modality that I offer, any service, is getting to the core of the problem. And so everything integrates together. And now here I am, it's been 21 years since I started my practice, and it continues to evolve.
Great. Yeah, it's wonderful how, those who have healed and continue to heal then go forward and help others. And you mentioned there that, dysfunctional adult relationships, but you had a very traumatic, turbulent childhood as well. And you describe that, as you said, in your book. And can you describe trauma? How would you describe trauma?
To me, trauma is any experience that was too much for your heart and mind to handle. It could also be physically too. And so that it's still there if you continually ruminate on it, or it continues to show up in your thoughts, or you're continually triggered, but you're not quite sure why.
Okay. Yeah. It's like, as well, sometimes you may experience bursting into tears when starting to talk about it. And that it's right there. That emotion is like, it's just like this big wave that comes over you when you start to talk about it. And you said in your book, experiencing or witnessing something horrifying or adverse can create a feeling of insecurity, fear, and intensity that's too much to process or digest mentally and emotionally, creating a split or disconnect. Can you talk a little bit more about this disconnect, the split, and the effect that it can have on the body and mind?
Yes. So when we are in the midst of that experience, whether it's happening or we're witnessing it happening, it's a self-preservation mechanism where we either compartmentalize it, we, kind of move it to a part of our mind where we don't have to directly look at it. Or in my case, and in many cases, especially when it's, as a child, which could be, all the way up through young adult years, is a complete disconnect where you almost are disassociated with a part of yourself because that part is having too much of an experience and you can't function throughout the day. And so that was my experience, is realizing I was really good at being able to get things done, provide, take care of my children, but it was at a cost because I was just driving forward. And I realized that there was a lack of heart awareness through that. Mainly because there was a concern that if I start looking at my quote unquote stuff, what's going to happen? Am I going to emotionally break down? Am I going to, end up in the psych ward? I don't know. And I, have a grandmother who had a breakdown and, had to be institutionalized for a period of time. My mother certainly wasn't psychologically well. And so what I had seen so far was that when people break down, they don't restore afterwards. And so there was a lot of avoidance. But then as I was, getting into different relationships, that's when I realized there's a part of us that is active that we're not directly aware of. And it happens through, our subconscious behavior. So, maybe I'd be in a conversation with a partner at the time and maybe they say something and then I would have this intense feeling of either fear or wanting to fight or freeze, and realizing, wow, if I just go through the words of the conversation, it does not add up. And that's when I started realizing this is a trigger response. I am responding to something that reminds me of something that was already there within me. And that's what happens, with the triggers, is if we don't look at them and heal them, they're already there within us. So it's just a matter of time before somebody or something comes along where our senses are activated that will take us into that trauma trigger time loop, and we're reliving it again. And that's why the reactions can seem so off the wall, or extreme, because it's as if it's happening. And so that really has been my commitment with myself, and it continues to be, as well as guiding others, because it can take you, in my experience, definitely take you into the wrong relationships. It can definitely harm relationships because you're not intending to be harmful. But if you're reacting to somebody because you believe that that's happening, that can be harmful. And, nobody wants to be victimizing somebody, but when you're in a triggered state, the other person might very well feel victimized, even though you're having an experience of being the victim, right? And so it's this double-edged sword where if we don't take responsibility for those parts of ourselves that have disconnected, we have a responsibility to our inner child, our inner angsty teen, or our inner young adult to say, hey, I got you. You're not in that experience anymore, and you don't have to continue to live in that experience anymore. But the only way you can do that is you have to have courage to face it and know that there's a part of you there that's pretty much operating on autopilot. It needs to be looked at. It needs to be seen, heard, loved, and accepted, healed, and then integrated so that there can be more of you available.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said. And as you said, there is that avoidance and suppression of the pain, and that's a survival mechanism at a certain time, right? That you just need to get through the day-to-day life. However, that suppression of that pain, that avoidance can manifest, right? Physically, mentally, emotionally, and as you said, getting triggered by others. So it really is a journey of courage to face it and getting that support to help you through this. Because as you said in your own experience, you were fearful about what was going to happen. If you were starting to peel back those layers, you were afraid of the consequences, right?
Definitely. Yeah, I had no idea. I thought I can't psychologically break down. I have 2 children to take care of.
Yeah. You have a lovely quote in your book by EDHIR, and it says that healing is about becoming whole again. It's about integrating all the fragments of ourselves, mind, body, and spirit. It's about returning to the way we were before when we lost touch with our heart. And you have developed your own EDHIR method or process, and it's a technique for mentally and emotionally digesting traumatic experiences. So can you share with us a little bit about that process? Give us an insight into it.
Yes. So earlier when I mentioned when clients would start talking about their trauma and I would just start asking questions, I started documenting because there was a certain line of questioning that seemed to naturally just erupt from my being before I was, trained in anything really. And so I started documenting how I would ask questions, and it was like they were exploring. And by the way, the name for the process only came when I was writing my book. It never had a name before. It was just something that I would do in each session. Mm. And I woke up at 3 a.m. from a dream and I saw the letters. And when I pronounced it, I looked it up in the dictionary because it sounded like the word EDHIR. And when they show how to pronounce it, it's EDHIR. So I knew, I said, that is a sign right there. And EDHIR is actually the 5 steps of the process. So the first step is to explore. What are the symptoms that you are having? What happened to you? And then the second phase is discover. And that's when you start discovering how what has happened to you is affecting your life. Oftentimes during that session where we're using the EDHIR process is where you will meet that wounded part of you. That's the whole purpose of it, is to find that little self or wounded self. Now in my book, I call her little J. And it's that part of us that's living in that trauma trigger time loop. And once you've discovered her, and there's different ways of doing that. Oftentimes, I see a lot of people online or in office, and there's a lot of breathing, a lot of relaxing, tapping into the body to get to a very relaxed state, to feel safe in order to take that journey to find that part of you who had the experience. And for the record, you don't have to relive the experience in order to do this. It's just knowing that there's a part of you. They had this experience and they're continually reliving it, and it's causing a problem in your present day life. So once you discover that part of you, all of this is happening within your own mind. I'm just facilitating by asking questions and making sure to hold a safe space container for the healing to happen. And this is really all about empowerment. So encouraging each client to remember that the safe space that they have created within their own mind to be able to see the wounded part of themselves, that is the absolute safest space because they're in control of everything that happens there. And that's very empowering because when you have had a trauma, you don't feel safe. So feeling empowered to know that within you, you have all that you need, and then understanding how to tap into it can be very empowering. So once you've discovered that part, then you need to figure out, well, what kind of healing does this little one need? You actually know what they need because you know what you didn't get. So again, it's just a matter of how the questions are asked so that you can discover on your own, what does this little part of you need? Now, our basic needs that we have are to be seen, to be heard, to be loved, and to be accepted. And of course, there's many variations in between there. So the first thing I will usually guide a client towards is to just observe, but observe from the big self or the higher self. So I will usually suggest to get big, so big that you can see a 360-degree view of the little one that you're observing. That way it keeps you in that higher mind, higher self, and you are less likely to get caught up in the story or the feelings that you might be afraid of experiencing. And feelings will come. No doubt every session, someone's crying, but that's what we want. We want that heart space to open and crying to happen to clear it out. So as I'm guiding a client to look at that part of themselves, that's when they get to give feedback. Oh, I see that this part of me is sad or scared. And then a dialogue develops between the bigger self and the little self of, what they needed. And so this can take a little bit of time. And then the most important is to make a commitment that you are taking full responsibility for your little one from this point on. They're not going to stay in the trauma trigger time loop. You're going to rescue them, but you're also going to make them a promise that you will never leave them behind again. Because from that aspect's experience, you left them. There was a disconnect. You've gone on to live your life, but they've been back in the past reliving the trauma. So they need to know that you're not going to essentially abandon them. And so that can be really powerful once you make that commitment. It can also be a little scary too. So you make that commitment, and once the client feels that they are feeling a sense of either clarity or alignment with every conversation they've just had with their little self, and it seems that healing has happened, then integration can happen. And I will usually encourage them to either play or make some sort of physical contact with their little self, look them in the eye, match the breath until the two become one. And if it's through play, I've had experiences where maybe they play Ring Around the Rosie until the two of them, merge and become one. Maybe they go running out into a field. Everyone's experience will be uniquely different. And so that's the integration phase. And then as they come out of the session, that's going to be the relate phase. there's a whole new part of them that is online now. It's been integrated. So it will take time for them to relate with themselves first. And then the people around them may have to make an adjustment because they're going to be different. And so I encourage people not to overanalyze the session. Just experience life. How are you experiencing life different? Did you still get triggered by the same thing, or did it shift? Do you notice you want to go play more? Maybe because your inner child is now on board and she's like, hey, let's go play. And so that, when Idan says to become whole again, before we lost touch with our heart, this is all about the relationship that we have with ourself, learning to love ourself first. Then we can bring that to our relationships, our family, out into the communities and out into the world. But it begins with you. And that's the EDHIR process.
Beautiful. Yeah. It's such a journey of awareness, right? The exploration, the discovery, how it's affecting your life, and then the empowerment. And you're studying Ayurveda, you're Ayurvedic doctor in training, correct?
Yes, I have completed all my classes. My dissertation is pending, which is about showing the Ayurvedic community that the EDHIR process is a valid form of Sattva Abhijaya Chikitsa for cases of post-traumatic stress disorder.
Wonderful. So I would love to know how you're implementing Ayurveda into your practice and how the EDHIR process, as you just said, can be very helpful.
Right. So the first thing is the most basic that we've, learned at a counselor level was diet, lifestyle, and routine. Mm-hmm. That has to be set first because you need a strong foundation when you start looking at this unconscious and subconscious content. So we need to build resiliency or build up the ojas within a client. And so that's one of the first things that we do is a full Ayurvedic assessment, and then make sure that they are, getting their routine in such a way that is supportive to their healing, making sure that they are trying to eat the right foods, and not making it an overwhelming experience because there is a lot of information that Ayurveda offers. And so when it comes to making changes, I usually will suggest 3 changes, and we wait until those changes happen before we add any more. When somebody is coming from a very sensitive constitution because of trauma or negative life experiences, we don't want to overwhelm people with a whole list of things to do. So those are the basics: diet, lifestyle, and routine. And then building up someone's mental constitution and emotional constitution. So making sure that we are giving as much encouragement as possible to continue to move forward, even if the suggestions that we've made, maybe it's to drink warm water instead of cold. Oftentimes, if a client is not feeling successful in that area, that may carry on into other areas. So continually giving them encouragement. You're doing great. Okay, that's something you're still working on. And then using the EDHIR process in the sessions as things come up. That's usually how I implement it. So I'll incorporate body work as the EDHIR process is happening if we are in office, or I will guide them through it online.
And are there any case studies that you can share with us, or any stories that you have to share?
Actually, yes. So I just did a webinar for the California Association of Ayurvedic Medicine, and I brought a very interesting case study that, and I also mentioned some in my book as well. This particular client, she was having a psychosomatic experience from trauma that she had as a kid. So I think she was based in Sri Lanka, and she had an experience at a boarding school at about 9 or 10 where she was trying to get some water, and apparently she had to climb over a wall to get some water. So that was the first red flag for me, was why was this child having to climb a wall to get some water? Mm. And they were afraid that she was with some friends. And so there was a fear that the nun was going to catch them. And so here she is at the top of this wall. And her friends are telling her, jump, just jump. And she doesn't think for herself in that moment. She's the youngest of this group. And so she jumps. When she falls, a stick actually penetrates through the side of her vagina. Mm. And she is now basically like she can't move, right? And if the stick is removed, she'll bleed out. Mm. When she came to me, she said, every time my 4-year-old daughter does something where I think she's going to get hurt, that part of my body starts spasming. Wow. That injury. So that's a psychosomatic response. Her body is actually reliving it every time she has a fear that her 4-year-old daughter is going to hurt herself, which is triggering the event that happened for her in childhood. So as I'm taking her through the EDHIR process for this particular case, she actually did go back to the moment where she is at that top of the wall. And what she wanted to do was to tell this part of herself, think for yourself, make a different choice, and don't be afraid to ask for a cup of water. So as she's having this experience, there's a lot of emotional processing happening. She's meeting this part of herself for the first time. She's having this dialogue. And because she so quickly tapped into it, we took it one step further. And I had her then bring her or take herself back to the situation that triggered her about her daughter getting hurt. I think her daughter was going to run across the street and she sensed it. And so as she is reliving the experience of the possibility of her daughter running across the street, all of a sudden she taps into power she didn't have before, where she was able to move calmly and create energy and space that kind of gave her 4-year-old a signal of not to run across the street, and then have a conversation with her about safety. Mm-hmm. So do you see how the two align? She needed to talk to her younger self first to create the safety so she'd have the power within her. And then she was able to talk to her 4-year-old. So after that, I asked her, please keep in touch and let me know if you are still getting that psychosomatic response. Well, as she, with the session, concluded, then she was like an open book. She wanted to start talking about all the other things that were going on because she was starting to make connections at that point. And that's what's so beautiful is you watch the light bulb come on for people and they realize, oh my goodness, I need to heal this and I need to heal that because this is affecting that. Mm. And that's really what you want for people. So she has not had, this was a couple months ago, she has not had a psychosomatic response activating that physical trauma. She's doing better with the communication with her daughter. And so the next session, she has an idea of what she'd like to work on. And so by the time she comes in, if that's still presenting itself, that's what we'll work on. But it's important, just to stay present because that might, even though she has said that may not be the thing that's actually showing up. Mm. There is other trauma that, she would like to look at. And so that was more of a chronic case that happened. She was a 50-year-old female coming in, dealing with, her 8 or 9-year-old self. Mm. I think I referenced it in my, no, this was a client that came after. He wrote a review on the back of my book and he had a near-death car accident. Mm. And one of the fellow Ayurvedic doctor students had referred my book to him. And so he reached out a month after the incident. He read chapter 6, which was about the EDHIR process. And he said, reading that gave me the courage to at least get behind the wheel. I was afraid to even get in the car. And he said, I need to heal this. And so we did a few sessions. And in that particular case, he did go back at the moment the accident was happening. He wanted to see it as it was happening. And I wanted to have him connect with his higher self to give him the courage and the comfort as that accident was happening so that he would know he's okay. And so through this, he did a couple more sessions where it wasn't directly related to the car accident. He then was able to trace back that feeling of possibly dying and when he felt that as a kid. So then it led us to a childhood trauma. Mm. And so then we worked on that. And he only needed a couple sessions. And that's mainly because it was acute trauma, which was great. And, I just followed up with him not too long ago, and he said, no, I'm doing really well. And I was like, okay, that's what I want to hear. Right. So there are a lot more cases, but those are just two examples, one of acute trauma and one of chronic trauma.
Yeah, it's great to hear those examples. And so what advice would you give for a listener out there today if they're struggling with disconnection, whether it's through adverse experiences or trauma?
I would definitely recommend that you seek out some sort of support to begin your healing journey. There's a lot of, good tools and feedback in my book and the Abundance Beyond Trauma workbook, but I may not resonate with you. You may not resonate with me. And there are a lot of great practitioners out there that have really great services, really great modalities, but have courage to say, hey, I need help and support with this. Because my story is a great example, as well as, those that I have counseled, that things can change, but you do have to have the courage to turn around and face it. And when you turn around and face it, by the time you've healed it, you realize it really wasn't as scary as you thought it was. It was your little self that was still scared from so long ago.
Right. And in the case of where you see a loved one is suppressing trauma and you see how it's adversely affecting them, but they're still in that suppressing stage and they're not on that path to healing. Obviously, you have to have a lot of compassion in this case. Would you have any advice for someone who sees a loved one suffering because of suppressed trauma, and how you navigate that if they're not ready or if they're not aware?
Yeah. And the psyche is very fragile in cases where there's been trauma. So it's important not to blast somebody directly, oh, you're behaving this way because of your trauma. That's probably even more traumatizing to do it that way. I have found through just gentle conversation and trying to ask leading questions that lead someone through their own thought process to want to ask more questions. So when I am coaching others, it's very important to me that it's them that feels like they figured it out, not me giving them the answer, because it's way more empowering. Mm-hmm. So, if I see a loved one who is having an experience and I see that it's coming from their traumatized self, I try to slow down the situation, whatever it is, and then make direct eye contact if they're comfortable with that. I'm somebody who is very much a direct eye contact person, and that's mainly because the eyes are the window to the soul. So when I meet someone, I meet their inner child before I meet them. And so when I see this, I will first ask, would you like a hug? And simply offering a hug and slowing the person down, sometimes just that alone can bring them to a state of an emotional release. Whether they're aware of why they're releasing is something different. But that is the beginning of that heart valve opening. Once the heart is open, there is much more receptivity. And so it could be, asking questions of, it seems like you are feeling frustrated. Can you say more about that? Do you remember having that experience as a kid? Now, my daughters and I have these conversations on a regular basis, but they're very aware of what their trauma has brought into their life. So, we actually do this for each other, which is kind of fun. Mm-hmm. And so just asking questions in a way that allows people to connect the dots, make the connections, and realize, okay, you're having a human experience. It's feeling intense right now. You also had some emotional or mental baggage that is showing up right now? So, I mean, each case is going to be different because every personality is different, but always gently. Don't push people. It has to be gently, because if you push someone, that could be more traumatic. That could actually trigger their trauma too. Forcing somebody to do something that they're not wanting to do or ready to do, that alone is trauma.
Right. Or it could put the walls back up, right? Yeah. So creating a supportive environment to open up conversation and just leading with curiosity without having targeted questions.
Yeah.
Great advice. Before we finish up here, is there anything else that you wanted to share today?
Actually, yes. I would like listeners to know that I created the I'm Triggered Pocket Guide, which I offer for free on my website at goodbyetension.com. This pocket guide the first 3 steps will get you out of a traumatized state so that your brain comes back online and can start functioning. Then the remaining steps are how to use the EDHIR process, and then how to test out whether or not the healing has happened or if you need to do it again. And this was the biggest thing I wanted to get out into the world, was that pocket guide. Something that when you're having a moment, you have a way to pull it up, or you've told your accountability partners about it and they have it, so that they can bring it to you, because oftentimes we do forget the tools that we have when we're triggered. And then also have courage. I mean, at the end of the day, you should want to spend the rest of your life with yourself. So ask yourself, are you in the best relationship with yourself, or would you like to work on some things so that you can have the life that you want?
Beautifully said. Such a beautiful offering, the I'm Triggered Pocket Guide. And can you tell people where they can go to find out more about you, where they can find your book, most importantly, and your other offerings?
Yes. So you can go to goodbyetension.com. And you can find my book, the services that I offer. There's now monthly webinars going through, the triggers, the EDHIR process, lots of the things that I speak about in my book. And then I've just put together some 3, 5, and 7 week coaching programs as well, trying to give people different options if cost seems to be the barrier.
Lovely, Jeannine. It has been such a pleasure. You're doing such wonderful work in the world. I love that you're combining this with the supportive practices of Ayurveda. And thank you for bringing this into the world. And thank you for the work you do. Very important.
Thank you, Colette.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Jeannine, and please check out the show notes for all the details. And don't forget, I have my upcoming group discounted Digestive Reset Cleanse starting February 2nd. You can find those details in the show notes also, or go to my website, elementshealingandwellbeing.com. And for the February 2nd event, go to the events page. And you can also find all my other online services there as well. If you haven't already subscribed or followed the podcast, please do so, and the new weekly episodes will automatically download for you. And if you feel that you're getting benefit from this podcast, I would appreciate if you would rate and review the podcast, and would help others to find this wonderful Ayurvedic information. You can find me on social media under Elements Healing and Wellbeing on Facebook, and my new Instagram page is Elements of Ayurveda Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, take good care of yourself, be well, and bye for now. Slán go fóill.